All right, everybody, welcome back. Ready for a deep dive into Supercommunicators. This book is seriously like a treasure chest, full of advice on how to have those conversations that just click.
It's funny, isn't it? We often think that some people are just natural communicators, like they were born with this magical ability. But this book really digs into the science behind those great conversations, those times when you feel like you're really clicking with someone.
It's true. We've all had those conversations where it feels like you're totally vibing with the other person, like your brains are on the same wavelength.
Absolutely. And it turns out there's something to that feeling. It's called neural entrainment. Basically, during those moments of deep connection, our brainwave patterns actually start to mirror each other's. It's kind of amazing. It's like our brains are syncing up to the rhythm of the conversation.
Whoa, a brainwave rave. Now that's an image. Okay, so the book tells this really cool story about a CIA recruiter. How awesome of a job title is that? Anyway, he completely nails this whole neural entrainment thing. His name's Lawler, and he's trying to recruit this woman named Yasmin.
Oh, this sounds intriguing. And I'm guessing this wasn't your typical job interview.
Not even close. Picture this. They're having dinner, and Yasmin is so not feeling it. Lawler tries to cheer her up, cracking jokes, telling stories, just trying to lighten the mood.
Oh, I've been there. That instinct to try and force a mood shift instead of meeting someone where they are. Yeah, not always the best strategy.
You're telling me. Well, it totally backfires on him. But here comes the plot twist. Lawler gets real. I mean, he starts talking about his own anxieties, about his job at the CIA, of all things, and suddenly, boom, everything changes. Yasmin opens up. They connect on a whole other level.
It is the power of matching. And I don't mean mimicking like you're trying to copy them, but genuinely understanding and aligning with their emotional state. It's about tuning into their frequency and meeting them there.
Okay, but that whole matching thing, how do you even know what someone's emotional state is if they're not saying it out loud?
That's where this idea comes in. What's this really about? It's a conversation, but you have to go deeper beyond what's being said, right? What are the needs, the unspoken stuff that's really driving the conversation?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Like when a friend keeps saying they need to move this weekend, but they're not actually asking for help, even though...
Yeah, they want it. Classic. They're dropping hints. But to really get it right, you got to think on two levels. First, what does each person need from this conversation? Is it practical solutions, emotional support, just someone to listen?
Because sometimes just listening is the best thing, right?
Yeah.
But it's more than just individual needs, too, isn't it? There's this whole other layer of unspoken rules, the shoulds and shouldn'ts of how we interact.
Exactly. That's the second level. Figuring out the unspoken norms, the rules that determine how decisions are made in this specific situation. And those rules, they can totally change depending on who you're talking to, their background, the whole context.
It's like everyone's got their own rule book sometimes. This reminds me of that story in the book about Dr. Ide. He's this prostate cancer surgeon, super smart guy. He'd give patients all the data, survival rates, risks, benefits, the whole 9 yards.
But they weren't choosing what he thought was best, even with all the facts.
Exactly. Turns out he was coming at it from a purely analytical angle. The book calls it the logic of costs and benefits, like just weighing the pros and cons. But many patients needed something more. They needed to connect through what the book calls the logic of similarities.
Ah, the two logics. This is so important. So the logic of costs and benefits, that's your classic data-driven approach. If this, then that. Very logical.
Very Dr. Edie. But then there's the logic of similarities. What's that all about?
Think of it like this reminds me of, approach. It's all about shared values, experiences, emotions. It's that feeling of, I get you, even if the data says something else entirely. Think about those commercials with real people sharing their stories.
Right. They're not giving you statistics. They're creating a feeling of connection. So for Dr. Edie's patients, it wasn't enough to just hear the numbers. They needed to connect with others who'd been there, feel understood in their fears.
Exactly. Once he started incorporating that logic of similarities, sharing his own experiences, really listening to their fears, everything shifted. They felt heard, and that made his expertise even more powerful.
So we've got matching, the two logics. It's like a whole toolkit for supercommunication. What else is there?
Well, all of this leads to another crucial element, asking the right questions.
Asking the right questions, huh? It's like that old saying, the answers you get depend on the questions you ask. But did you know there's actual science behind it? Like a formula for building intimacy faster.
Wait, are you talking about that fast friends procedure, the one with the list of questions?
Yes. Okay, so researchers found that asking and answering increasingly personal questions with someone can actually make you feel closer, faster.
It's wild,
That's
right? But the really interesting part is why it works. See, deep questions, they require vulnerability. You're putting yourself out there a bit, and that vulnerability triggers something called emotional contagion.
emotional contagion. Okay, now that sounds a little scary. Like, is this going to turn into a zombie movie?
No, no zombies, I promise. It's actually pretty simple. Think about it. You see someone laughing, and suddenly you're more likely to smile or laugh too, right? Or you hear a sad story, and you might feel a bit sad yourself. That's emotional contagion. We're wired to connect with each other's emotions.
So by asking these deep questions, we're making ourselves vulnerable, which then sets off this emotional chain reaction, and boom, we feel closer.
Exactly. But there's a catch. It has to go both ways. Both people need to be open to sharing, to take turns asking and answering. It's like a dance of vulnerability.
Just like that matching we were talking about, but on a deeper level. Which brings us back to our friend Dr. Ade. Remember how he wasn't really connecting with his patients? Once he started asking about their fears, their hopes, what mattered most to them, the conversations totally changed.
He went from just the medical stuff to the human stuff. And by sharing some of his own anxieties, he made himself vulnerable, which made it okay for them to do the same.
And because they felt truly heard, they were way more open to his advice. It's amazing what a few well-placed questions can do. Okay, let's get real for a second. What about those tough conversations? The disagreements, the conflicts, especially around really sensitive topics, those can feel impossible.
Yeah, those are tough. But the book has some good advice for that, too. It starts with understanding something called identity threat. Basically, when someone feels like their sense of self, who they are, their beliefs is under attack, it triggers a fight or flight response.
So it's like if you feel like your core beliefs are being challenged, you just shut down.
Basically, yeah. Your brain goes into survival mode and productive conversation goes right out the window. It's not about finding common ground anymore. It's about protecting yourself.
It's like that whole thing with Netflix and their radical candor experiment, right? Where they encouraged everyone to be brutally honest all the time.
Exactly. Good intentions, but maybe not the best execution. People ended up feeling judged and on edge, and it made those already difficult conversations about things like identity and bias almost impossible.
It's like you can't force people to be open and vulnerable.
Yeah.
They have to feel safe first.
100%. Everyone needs to feel like they can speak their mind without being attacked or judged. And to their credit, Netflix figured that out. They started having these workshops where people could talk about their experiences with identity and bias, but with ground rules. No shaming, no blaming, just listening and trying to understand each other.
So creating a space for dialogue, but with some boundaries to keep things respectful.
Right. It's a good example of how to approach those tough conversations. By setting clear expectations, focusing on respect, and welcoming different points of view, you create a space where people feel safe enough to actually open up.
And the book gives some great advice for how to actually do that.
Yeah.
Like really acknowledging other people's experiences, finding common ground, even just being mindful of your surroundings.
It all circles back to that idea of matching, meeting people where they are emotionally.
So this whole super communicator thing, it's not about being smooth or charming or manipulating people. It's about empathy, being curious, genuinely wanting to connect on a deeper level.
It's definitely a set of skills, but it's also a mindset shift. And what I take away from the book is that it's 100% worth the effort.
Especially when you consider the impact it can have on your life. I mean, think about the Harvard study of adult development. They followed these people for decades. And you know what they found? The biggest factor in happiness wasn't money or fame. It was the strength of their relationships.
And relationships are built on.
You guessed it. Communication. It really makes you think, right? Could becoming a better communicator be the key to not just stronger relationships, but a happier, more fulfilling life overall? Something to ponder. This has been an awesome deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.